Before she was the sultry star of Rio Bravo, before she stood shoulder to shoulder with John Wayne and Dean Martin, Angie Dickinson was just a quiet girl from North Dakota, dreaming in silence, unaware that her path would one day help redefine women in Hollywood. She was born Angeline Brown, on September 30, 1931, in the small town of Culm. Her father, a local newspaper publisher, moved the family to Burbank, California when Angie was 10. It was a desperate bid for stability during the Great Depression. But that single decision would unlock the door to a life no one could have predicted. Angie's early years were rooted in discipline and intellect. Inspired by her father's profession, she imagined a future in writing, not acting. She studied business at Immaculate Heart College in Los Angeles, aiming for a sensible career. Hollywood wasn't even a blip on her radar. But fate is never predictable. In 1953, almost on a dare, she entered a local beauty pageant, and something shifted. The cameras loved her. Casting directors took notice. Her poise, her confidence, and that rare kind of beauty, classic yet distinct, caught fire. Within a year, she made her screen debut in the Warner Brothers crime film Lucky Me. That opened the floodgates. Westerns quickly became her playground, and Angie stood out in a genre dominated by rugged men. She didn't play victims. She played women with steel beneath the smile, women who didn't wait to be saved. By 1959, her slow, steady climb reached a defining peak. She was cast as Feathers, the smart, seductive gambler in Howard Hawks' Western masterpiece Rio Bravo. It was a career-defining moment, and one that would also shape the deepest emotional scar of her life. Standing beside legends like John Wayne, Dean Martin, and a rising teen idol named Ricky Nelson, Angie finally had the spotlight she'd worked for. But what unfolded on that set would forever blur the line between cinematic triumph and personal heartbreak. "I never felt I belonged there," she would later admit. "I was terrified, and I still can't bring myself to watch it." Rio Bravo may be a celebrated Western classic, but for Angie Dickinson, it's a memory wrapped in anxiety, insecurity, and quiet sorrow. At just 27 years old, Angie was stepping onto the same set as three titans of entertainment: John Wayne, Dean Martin, and Ricky Nelson. For a young actress still carving out her place in the industry, it was nothing short of overwhelming. She played Feathers, a flirtatious gambler with a sharp tongue and fearless charm, a role that demanded equal parts vulnerability and confidence. But behind the camera, Angie wasn't feeling fearless. Not even close. "I felt like I was in over my head," she later confessed. "Those men, Wayne, Martin, they had such presence. I didn't know if I could keep up." The film would become a pillar of the Western genre, with its long, slow-burning tension, iconic standoffs, and rugged Americana. But for Angie, watching it meant seeing herself frozen in a time of emotional chaos. Her performance, though praised by audiences, became a personal sore spot. She's admitted she's never been able to sit through it, not once. Not because of shame, but because of what the film represents. A collision of ambition, fear, and a quiet, tender bond that would later haunt her deeply. That bond was with Ricky Nelson. Just 18 at the time, Ricky played Colorado Ryan, the young gunslinger. He was already a national heartthrob thanks to his music and his role on The Adventures of Ozzie and Harriet. But on set, he wasn't the cocky teen star people expected. He was gentle, observant, thoughtful in a way that left an impression on Angie. Despite their age difference, the two formed a natural closeness. Not scandalous, not loud, just genuine. They were two young people navigating the immense pressure of a high-stakes production, and finding comfort in each other's company. Ricky had this softness to him, Angie remembered. He was shy but sincere. Being around him felt safe. And that's rare. But time, as always, has a way of turning sweet memories into sharp ones. When Ricky died in a tragic plane crash in 1985, Angie lost more than a former co-star. She lost a piece of her past that no longer had a living heartbeat. And watching Rio Bravo? That would mean seeing him, alive, glowing, full of youth, frozen in celluloid. And that's something she's never been able to bear. To the world, Rio Bravo is a legendary Western, bold, gritty, and timeless. But for Angie Dickinson, it's something else entirely. It's a time capsule she refuses to open. While fans marvel at the chemistry between Feathers and Sheriff John T. Chance, Angie sees something different. She sees a version of herself she doesn't recognize anymore. Young, unsure, and self-critical. For years, she believed her performance didn't measure up. Not to Wayne. Not to Martin. Not even to Ricky Nelson. "I was still learning," she said. "When I look back, all I can see are the moments I flinched inside. The lines I wish I'd delivered differently. But that's only part of the reason she's never rewatched the film. The deeper reason? It lives in the quiet scenes. The moments Ricky Nelson appears on screen. By the time he stepped into the role of Colorado Ryan, Ricky was already a household name. Millions knew his voice, his face, his swagger. But Angie knew the boy behind the fame, a soft-spoken, sweet-natured young man who never let the spotlight change who he was. They didn't have a love affair. There was no tabloid fodder. What they had was something smaller and purer. A bond built under pressure, preserved in memory. So when he died, suddenly, brutally, in a fiery plane crash at just 45, the loss hit Angie harder than most ever realized. Watching Rio Bravo now would mean facing a ghost. It would mean hearing Ricky's voice echo through a saloon, seeing him tip his hat with that signature half-smile, knowing he never got to grow old. "It's too painful," she once admitted quietly. "Seeing him like that, it hurts in a way I can't really explain." For Angie, Rio Bravo is more than a film. It's a portrait of a life interrupted, a moment she can't revisit without breaking something inside. So while audiences celebrate the film, she chooses silence. Not out of bitterness, but out of love. After Rio Bravo, the world finally saw what Angie Dickinson was capable of. She wasn't just a pretty face. She had presence, timing, depth, and directors began to notice. Through the 1960s and 70s, Angie built a filmography that moved with grace across genres, from the slick heist of Ocean's 11 to the dark intensity of The Killers, and eventually into psychological territory with Dress to Kill. She worked with legends like Frank Sinatra, Lee Marvin, and Brian De Palma, yet never lost her own identity on screen. What set her apart was her emotional duality, strength and softness, confidence wrapped around a very real vulnerability. She didn't just play women. She played people, layered, flawed, bold. But her most defining role wouldn't come on the silver screen. It came in 1974, on television. Policewoman. When Angie stepped into the role of Sergeant Suzanne Pepper Anderson, she became a cultural lightning bolt. It was the first time a woman was shown as the lead in a gritty police drama, and not as an assistant or a love interest, but as a full-force detective with heart, brains, and authority. At the time, no one believed a woman could carry a crime show, she recalled. But we proved them wrong every week. Policewoman became a phenomenon, drawing millions of viewers and winning Angie a Golden Globe, along with multiple Emmy nominations. But more than the awards, it changed perceptions. It showed a generation of girls that they didn't have to play supporting roles. Not in stories, not in life. The show paved the way for every female-led drama that followed, from Cagney and Lacey to Law and Order, SVU. And while Dickinson never saw herself as a trailblazer, she undeniably was. She challenged the industry's boundaries, and quietly reshaped them. But behind all the acclaim, Angie was also living a very personal journey, one filled with heartbreak, sacrifice, and the deepest kind of love. And soon, that love would change the course of her life forever. By the mid-1960s, Angie Dickinson had become one of Hollywood's most admired stars, adored not just for her roles, but for her elegance, wit, and magnetic charm. In 1965, she married the man many believed to be her perfect match, Burt Bacharach. A musical genius behind countless hits, Bacharach brought a different kind of spotlight, one filled with glamour, red carpets, and a whirlwind of creativity. Together, they were dazzling. The media called them Hollywood royalty. But behind the glitz was a relationship layered with complexity, intense love, and quiet heartache. Their most profound bond came on July 12, 1966, with the birth of their only child, Leah Nikki Bacharach, affectionately known as Nikki. From the beginning, Nikki's development seemed different. As a toddler, she struggled to communicate and connect in ways that other children did. In a time when autism was still largely misunderstood, Angie and Burt were left to navigate the unknown, confused, exhausted, and fiercely protective. While Bert's career surged, Angie began stepping away from hers. Roles were turned down. Public appearances became fewer. She was no longer just a star. She was a full-time mother, fighting for her daughter's future, learning every therapy, managing every specialist, enduring every uncertainty. "I had to be strong," she later said. "But some days, it took everything I had just to keep going." Nikki grew into a brilliant, sensitive soul. She loved music, books, and the quiet world she created for herself. But she also struggled deeply with mental health challenges that came with her condition. Angie never gave up. She stayed by her daughter's side, through hospitals, through heartbreak, through years of silence and progress and setbacks. Then, in 2007, the unimaginable happened. At the age of 40, Nikki took her own life. It was a loss that shattered both Angie and Bert. A grief too vast for words. Losing Nikki, Angie once whispered in a rare interview, "It was like losing part of my soul." In the wake of tragedy, Angie disappeared from the spotlight for a time. The world saw less of her, but those who knew her best say her strength only deepened. Because through it all, she remained a mother first. Even as heartbreak reshaped her world, Angie Dickinson's name never faded. She had become more than a screen legend. She was an enigma. A woman of depth, resilience, and surprising reinvention. In the 1980s, after years spent away from the spotlight to focus on her daughter, Angie re-emerged, not as a fading star clinging to past fame, but as a woman unafraid of her age, experience, or identity. Her next chapter? Unexpected, playful, even musical. She began a romance with Billy Vera, the soulful singer behind At This Moment. Their relationship was light, creative, and fun, a welcome contrast to the high-stakes pressure of her earlier years. Angie even appeared in the 1981 music video for Vera's I Can Take Care of Myself, reminding audiences that she still had charisma, and wasn't afraid to embrace modern pop culture. It was a brief spark, but one that showed a different side of Angie. She wasn't clinging to the past. She was choosing joy even in small doses. Then, in the 1990s, she stepped into yet another high-profile relationship, this time with legendary broadcaster Larry King. The pairing turned heads. King, known for his suspenders and no-nonsense interviews, was an unlikely match on the surface. But those close to them described their bond as deeply respectful, filled with sharp conversation and mutual admiration. They were often seen at events together, a power couple of intellect and charm. Though the romance didn't lead to marriage, it left a lasting impression. Larry was brilliant, Angie later said. "We laughed a lot. Talked about everything. It was honest." Throughout her life, Angie Dickinson didn't follow the typical Hollywood script. She navigated love, loss, motherhood, and fame on her own terms, never needing to define herself through the men she dated, but also never apologizing for the connections that mattered. With every chapter, she reminded the world that strength doesn't always look loud. Sometimes, it's the quiet choices, the ones made out of love, loyalty, or survival, that show us who someone really is. For decades, the whispers never stopped. Was there more to Angie Dickinson and Ricky Nelson than just a fleeting friendship on the set of Rio Bravo? She never said much. She didn't deny it. She didn't confirm it. She simply held her silence, with the same grace and mystery that had defined her entire career. But now, at 93 years old, Angie has finally chosen to speak. Not for scandal. Not for attention. But for truth. In a quiet, deeply personal conversation, Angie opened up about Ricky. Not the teen idol. Not the poster boy. But the young man behind the fame. There was something different about him, she said. He didn't try to impress. He didn't need to. He had a calm, a kindness, like he knew exactly who he was. Their bond, she explained, came during a fragile time, for both of them. She was riddled with self-doubt, struggling to find her footing in a male-dominated world. He, despite his fame, was still a teenager navigating a life too big for his age. There was no torrid affair. No tabloid-worthy secret. What they had was something quieter. A connection. A shared sensitivity. A moment in time that neither of them could ever recreate. But the world never lets go of mystery, and Angie spent years watching others speculate, distort, and sensationalize something that was, in truth, sacred to her. Now, with decades of perspective, she's ready to let go of the secrecy. Not because it benefits her, but because Ricky deserves to be remembered as he truly was. He had so much more to give, she said softly. And I think that's what hurts the most. In breaking her silence, Angie isn't chasing headlines. She's offering something rare in a world obsessed with gossip, authenticity. A chance to remember Ricky Nelson not just as a star, but as a soul who touched hers, however briefly. And in doing so, she also reveals a part of herself that fans never truly knew. The woman who kept a secret, not to hide something, but to protect someone she once cared for deeply. Today, Angie Dickinson lives quietly, far from the flashing lights of the red carpet. She rarely gives interviews. She doesn't seek the spotlight. But when she does speak, the world still listens, because she's earned that kind of reverence. Her story is more than just one of fame or fortune. It's the story of a woman who refused to be boxed in. She was a trailblazer, becoming one of the first women to carry a primetime drama on her shoulders. She was a mother, choosing her daughter's needs over her own fame, even when the world wasn't watching. She was a romantic, unafraid to love boldly, but wise enough to walk away when it no longer served her soul. And she was a survivor, weathering personal tragedy and public scrutiny with a quiet resilience that became her signature. But perhaps most importantly, Angie Dickinson never let the industry, or the world, define her. She embraced the complexities. She lived in the gray areas. And she proved that a woman could be strong and soft, glamorous and grounded, broken and still unshakably whole. Her influence lingers, in the actresses who followed her, in the roles that now exist because she helped pave the way, and in the legacy of Policewoman, which broke barriers long before it became fashionable to do so. As for Rio Bravo, it will always remain untouched, at least by her. Not because she's ashamed, but because some memories aren't meant to be rewatched. They're meant to be felt, protected, kept in the heart where they still live in full color. "I lived that moment," she once said, "and for me that's enough." In a world that often demands closure, Angie Dickinson reminds us that sometimes the most powerful stories are the ones we choose not to finish. Because some goodbyes, especially the ones we never said, stay with us forever.